Earlier, we spoke about the apparent suicide of self-proclaimed billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. The financier was found in his cell just days after being taken off suicide watch. Epstein was supposed to be monitored every 30 minutes. Now the FBI and the Department of Justice are looking for answers into how Epstein was able to take his own life. Meanwhile, the alleged victims of Epstein say they will continue to press charges despite his death. Joining me now is CBS News legal analyst Rikki Klieman. Thanks so much for being here. First of all, the big question, how in the world could this have happened? I think the news was absolutely stunning over the weekend.
Stunning, shocking, appalling. No one knows how in the world this could have happened. You're doing negligence you could look at best and corruption at worst. What you had is someone who was on a suicide watch since an alleged attempted suicide back in July, and then mysteriously he is taken off suicide watch. So the first question we have is what protocols were followed to take him off? If you are taken off a suicide watch appropriately, that is with a psychologist or a psychiatrist saying that it is okay for you to go back into a cell, you were supposed to be put in a cell with another person so you do not try to take your life if you are alone again. So taking him off suicide watch, I think, was outrageous. Then putting him in a cell alone makes it even worse. And then apparently, we will see as this story develops, he was supposed to be checked on every 30 minutes, which seems hardly often enough, and he wasn't checked on that night every 30 minutes. Why? The MCC, which is where he was housed, supposedly one of the most secure facilities in the country, where famous and high-profile defendants are housed, that at that point, Paul Manafort, by the way, is still there, El Chapo was there, that they say, well, they were understaffed and people were working overtime. Well, to me, that's no excuse at all.
Absolutely appalling when you look at the protocols that might not have been put in place. Then what happens next with these charges against Epstein?
The charges against Epstein himself will be dropped. There's no defendant. But charges against any of his alleged co-conspirators, enablers, assistants, people who helped in the conspiracy are still going to be pursued by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman has made that statement that he will continue to investigate. So the assistants, the enablers, the co-conspirators, and right in the bullseye is a woman named Ghislaine Maxwell. Ms. Maxwell was the girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein years ago. She then continued on to manage his properties, and it is said by some of the accusers that she was the one who procured the young women for him and may have even participated in some of these sexual acts involving underage girls.
How difficult is it for these women to go after Epstein's assets now?
Well, I think that they can go after Epstein's assets actually in one of two ways. The first way is either they file, if they have not already filed, a civil action against Epstein. And New York, ironically, on Wednesday of this week, August 14th, has now lifted the statute of limitations for 1 year on any civil action for sexual abuse of a child. So if you're a New York victim, as opposed to a Florida victim, you can file as of Wednesday for 1 year. The assets can be frozen in the estate. Another way, interestingly enough, which almost floored me when I did the research, the government can still go after the assets in civil forfeiture. Doesn't matter that he's dead. There's a precedent for this, that they can go after the assets. They file an action against a piece of property, such as In Ray house on East 70th or 71st Street, or In Ray airplane, and with the tail number. And the government could amass the assets and create a fund if it chooses to be a collection agency for the victims. But the government also has an interest in the money for the government. So I would think that, understanding Jeffrey Berman, the U.S. Attorney's statement, that if they decide to go after the assets in civil forfeiture, that they will create a fund for the victims.
His criminal case was set for next June. how long will these victims have to wait before different cases are filed, if they're going after civil or they're going after his assets?
Well, it's not going to be quick. The most important thing is to freeze those assets so they do not go under a will or under the laws of probate to the heirs. We are told there is a brother. We don't know if there's children. I mean, there is no knowledge that there are any children. But remember, if there's a will, he was also quite philanthropic, particularly not only with charities, but also in the world of scientific endeavors. So we don't know what a will might say. So then you have a contest between those who might be named in a will and the victims of all of this sexual abuse.
So the clock is ticking here.
The clock is ticking.
The clock is ticking. Let's talk about his autopsy. Could those results be revealed?
Yes. The medical examiner is one of three investigators. We have the Inspector General, we have the FBI, and we have the medical examiner. The medical examiner's job is to determine the cause of death. His office released a statement last night that said that they were not at this time letting out the autopsy results. Interesting fact is that they permitted, according to the lawyers for Jeffrey Epstein and the family of people around Jeffrey Epstein, they permitted another pathologist to watch the autopsy, and that's Michael Baden, who is a very famous pathologist in New York. So I think that there is a big question on the part of the lawyers who represent Mr. Epstein of if this was a suicide or not.
There are a lot of conspiracy theories swirling around out there regarding that. How nervous should his associates be right now?
If I'm one of his associates, particularly the people who arranged travel, the people who arranged for these young women to get into the United States or were in the United States, get over to Mr. Epstein's home or any of his homes, I would be very worried right now. They, by the way, have a unique defense. Doesn't mean it will work. Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers had asserted at the time of this arrest that he could not be charged in the Southern District of New York because he was given immunity for all of these actions, his lawyers said, back in Florida in 2007 and 8. Well, that immunity agreement is supposed to also cover accomplices. And so those accomplices, through their lawyers, may also try to raise that defense. The U.S. Attorney's Office says that defense is hogwash, that's my word, that it will not fly, and that the Southern District of Florida could not bind the Southern District of New York.
There's so much more to follow on this.
We'll be doing this a long time.
Thank you, Rikki Klieman. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Meg.